Hello there.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Talk to me, Goose.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Why so serious?
World! I could do this all day.
Are you watching closely?
Welcome, everybody, to the One-Eyed Film Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Mossberg, and I got Zach joining me today to talk about The Quiet Place. How's it going, Zach?
Hey, it's going good. How are you?
I'm good. So The Quiet Place is a very respected pair of movies. They have a very original story with some well-respected actors and a really intense PG-13 horror vibe to it. And I've really loved both of these for a long time, and I'm excited to talk about it. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on these movies. What do you think, Zach, about these movies? Would you recommend them to someone? What are your thoughts?
Oh yeah, I would definitely recommend these movies to someone. They might be like my favorite recent series of movies. Yeah, I just remember, I think it was my sister who encouraged my family to watch the first one, and yeah, the sequel had already been announced at that point, so I was expecting the full family to survive. Then when he dies at the end, it really hit me pretty hard.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, my bad.
No.
If you haven't seen it yet,
what are you even
stop
doing?
listening now. Go watch them.
Yeah. These movies have a way of getting you invested, both with the action scenes that are really intense and make you sit on the edge of your seat, and also the sacrificial love of Lee to his family. I mean, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it just makes you feel for the character so much more. And the way that it was written and directed and all that was top notch. And this is one reason I respect a man like John Krasinski so much, is he lets his creative ideas just flow in everything that he does. I believe he directed this.
Yeah, I directed both of them.
Yeah, so he directed both of them. He just had full creative control over an original story. Like, this wasn't based off of anything. I believe it was inspired, like the design of the monster and like what if you have to be quiet all the time. Like the quiet theme is like a very original, like, what if this was the approach you had to make with these terrifying monsters versus blasting them with guns and all that. But I respect Krasinski because he can push a movie like this and make it so good. He knows what makes a good movie. There's other qualities to him that are just so positive, and him and Emily Blunt, just the pair of them working together, is so special to see as well, especially playing husband and wife like that. They don't even need to act. They already got that. They've been practicing for a couple years now. He's inspiring to a guy like me who just, I have a lot of ideas, and sometimes they don't always like have a way to manifest themselves. But when I see a guy who has an idea and rolls with it as far as he can, like with A Quiet Place, or I think during COVID he had a cool video series on YouTube that was just encouraging and uplifting, and just that idea that he kept rolling with and just kind of did it because he could, and I just really respect that in him.
Yeah, these movies also do a great job at building tension. Like, I remember sitting in the theaters in the second one just for like half the movie, just sitting tensely the whole time, just being like, okay, can I relax now? Can I relax now? And it just kept building until basically the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm. And it keeps you guessing. Like, being an original story, you really don't know what's going to happen. And having Bo die early on in the first movie, and then Lee at the end of this first movie as well, is very difficult to watch. And it is surprising when it happens. And you almost have the same feelings as either Evelyn or Reagan, who are watching their brother or their father, die. It's very difficult to watch. And the movies are supposed to bring you along on the journey as a viewer of the events, and having those emotions while you're watching the movie just tells you that it's a good movie.
Unlike, most comic book films where you kind of know who's not going to die, with just having completely original characters and original concept, you never really know who's going to survive and who's going to die. So yeah.
And also the way a story is formatted to keep you guessing like who could die or who will survive is not cookie cutter. Like, a lot of the recent movies that have come out are very cookie cutter, very predictable. And on that note, I'm going to make a quick amendment. I was very wrong about Ant-Man. We're going to take a little sidetrack here. I was very wrong about Ant-Man. I was hoping for a lot, and I know you have your own thoughts. I just need to amend where I thought that this was going to be a heavy hitter movie. I take all of it back. I'm very disappointed in that movie. It was very cookie cutter. It was very predictable. On that note, just had to throw that in there.
I mean, it's definitely the worst of the Ant-Man movies. I think most of that is just because they were trying to do something very different which can work sometimes, but I don't think it worked as well for them with this. It's just from like a visual standpoint, just when you do a whole movie just behind green screens without any like real settings, it's just you can't really get into the movie as well. And also a big part of what makes Ant-Man so cool, like especially with the growing and shrinking, is that it's like in normal environments. So then just like a mug can just be huge. But the environments of the quantum realm are environments we don't really understand, so it doesn't mean as much to see him grow or shrink.
There's no sense of scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had to throw that little tangent in there because I felt very embarrassed for my high expectations from our Ant-Man episode and then being very disappointed. So if you listen to that, I apologize. I had high hopes and they were dashed against the rocks. We might have an episode on it later, but
Hopefully Guardians of the Galaxy lives up to the expectations.
back to the topic at hand, Quiet Place. I'm very intrigued by any movie who does a modern dystopia or future dystopia where it's still partly your world that they're living in with just this little twist, whether that's Last of Us, which I've been watching, and we will have an episode coming out about that after the finale releases, where it is your world, like literally they're traveling to different cities and they're apocalyptic, they're overrun with infected. And this world where there's a sense of familiarity, and yet they have, sand trails, and they're doing everything in their home very quietly, and just a different mindset that they have developed since the monsters arrived, which we see in the first part of the second movie. But understanding that they had to change how they lived and their lifestyle is scary to a degree where we almost wonder if that could happen. Like with a modern dystopian movie like that, it's sort of possible, And not only the fear that the movie tells you should fear, the monsters, but also the fear of what if aliens like that invaded our planet, and then you're drawn in that way as well.
I think one of the biggest themes that I think of when I think of both of these movies is just hope, and just the Abbott family and just their willingness to do more than survive. I mean, it's a big part of the first film. It's like there's almost this unintentional pro-life theme in this first movie where they know this world is going to be dangerous for their child, but they have the child anyway. I mean, it doesn't make that much sense to have a child when there's like killer monsters anywhere, but they do they do it anyway because they're definitely not thriving. It's obvious that their goals are beyond just keeping themselves alive. They want to live instead of just cowering down to the fear of the world around them.
Yeah, I agree. Why would you bring a crying baby into a world where you have to be quiet? I understand that mentality, but they understand the value of a human life, and they understand that this baby that's coming into the world is special. And they know it'll be difficult. They're willing to take that risk. And we see a little bit of that in the second movie as well, where they have to keep this baby quiet. And unfortunately, that means keeping him in a chest or something. What was it?
Yeah, it was a crate thing of sorts. They had an oxygen tank on it and the mask on the baby.
Yeah. So again, just a different lifestyle that they had to adapt to as they learned, it's sound that attracts these monsters and all that.
They are definitely adapting, but at the same time, with having a baby, they're still fighting for just a normal life in a lot of ways.
Yeah, even though they have to, like I said, adapt, they're still trying to have a normal life with all the things that they can still do as much as possible.
Yeah.
And having a deaf daughter, obviously not by choice in the story, but also having Millicent Simmons be basically the lead actress for the duology. I believe it's going to be a trilogy soon. Sometimes I wonder why movies follow the special people, but it's because they're special that's why it makes them interesting. So it's not that we couldn't follow a story about a family who can all hear and everything and don't know sign language, but it makes it way more interesting to follow the family with the deaf child who all knows sign language beforehand, and now that plays to their advantage in this movie having to be quiet. They were prepared in a way, and having Millicent Simmons be the lead role and working with her to convey emotion in a way that only she can. And even the scenes, I think of specifically the ones where they're from her perspective and everything's just dead quiet and she can't hear anything, is scary and almost puts us in her shoes of not being able to comprehend the world, the loud world that's going on around her.
Yeah, I think especially of Bo's death scene, who's the youngest son who dies at the beginning of the first one. She doesn't hear the rocket start making noise, but she just sees the rest of her family all turn around and instantly she knows what happened, and you just see all this dread on her face, and it's just, wow, she's a talented actress. Makes you wonder if they were looking for a deaf actress for the role.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a story behind that. I definitely think it was the right call, especially for this story.
It adds a whole nother layer to it.
Yep, and at the end of that first movie, Lee sacrifices himself. Literally, this was a choice that he made to draw the monster away from his children, and that was emotional. Like, it was sad, but it just showed meaningful love he had for his children. I was just reading a book comparing how the family and the Trinity align in meaning to each other. And I believe the Truth Project from Focus on the Family has talked about this too. That's where I originally heard it. But the way that the Father, the Mother, and the children relate to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is all interconnected and reflective of each other, which is a whole different topic. But in the same way, Lee sacrificing himself for his children is the same reflection of Jesus sacrificing himself for us, for our sake, so that we may live. It's a little bit different because Lee doesn't come back from the dead, but it's the same care and love that knows that his sacrifice of himself will mean more to those that he loves. He's not thinking about himself. He's thinking about the ones that have more to live for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say in this whole metaphor, the Holy Spirit is kind of like the hearing aid in the movie. Because in a way, Lee, the father, leaves, but he leaves them with a great power to fight the darkness around them.
I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Especially once they figure out that key of the hearing aid frequency can make the speakers go haywire and, affect the monsters that way.
Yeah. A very interesting thing about this first movie is just the internal conflict. I feel like a lot of times in horror films, there's so much focus on the external conflict, like whether it's zombies, some kind of plague, or vampires, or whatever's in horror films these days, like Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, there's so much focus on that external conflict that there's not much they put in for an internal conflict. But this first film has such a impactful theme here, just about trauma and forgiveness. So at the beginning of the film, as we've mentioned before, the younger son dies. And obviously Reagan put a lot of that blame on herself. And they never really talk about that as a family afterwards. So she just feels blamed by her father, especially for the death of her brother. And this tension really drives the main conflict of the film. Like, we see Lee throughout the film trying to help her with her hearing aids, but she just totally rejects it. And then by the end of the film, when Lee sacrifices himself, she finally realizes that even though that happened with Bo, her brother, that her dad still loves her. And it's just this great theme about how, like, not talking about trauma doesn't make it go away. It's going to be uncomfortable, but there can be so much that can happen, like we saw with Lee and Reagan, that happens if you don't talk about traumatic events like the death of a child like this.
Yeah, covering the strong themes of talking things out and not stuffing your feelings down is really true to our real world, where we often let things simmer under the surface, and then it hurts more than it helps. And even though Reagan really felt guilty for it, she slowly finds out that her dad has forgiven her for it, and that's very sweet. For the first movie, it was very contained and just really the four of them, which made it, intense and passionately just enclosed and personal for the four of them. And then we kind of branch out in the second movie to include Emmett and also those people who were on the island. You get to see both how people have adapted in different ways, and also at the prologue to the movie where the aliens actually invade Earth on the comet. Then you also get to see how people reacted initially. And I would call that good world building. It sets the stage for getting us connected to these characters, this family, and then expands out from there. And it didn't need to. It just was a good place for the second movie to go in that direction.
We definitely see themes continue in this film from the first one, like living more than just survival. We have Emmett, whose whole life is just kind of centered around survival, and then the Abbotts come back into his life, who are trying to just actually help the world with what they figured out with the hearing aid. But Emmett's resistant to it for a while, but then once they hear the broadcast, and Reagan, the daughter, sneaks off, he joins her and first tries to get her back, but then he realizes this is something that they need to do, so then he goes for it.
And I love Cillian Murphy's addition to this sort of world, this saga. Yeah, he brings the very brooding father figure who lost his children and is now mourning them even all these years later. He brings that to the table and really is focused on himself and survival. That's why he has all the traps out. That's why he is ready to, hide for years, I guess. He is kind of that crazy guy, but also he is a survivalist and he knows what he needs to do. And the problem with his character is that he doesn't have anything to sacrifice. Whereas with Lee, he has to protect his family and eventually sacrifice himself. With Emmett, he just has to focus on himself, and there's almost an opposition from us about him because of, obviously he isn't the antagonist, but we don't relate to him as much because he's very selfish, because he doesn't need any other feeling. Like, he has to be selfish. There's no one else to share with. And when the Abbotts show up, he's very protective of his stuff because it's his stuff, and he didn't plan for this, but he understands slowly that these guys have the answer that could possibly save them all.
Yeah. It's interesting that he's kind of like the opposite of the Abbott family, in the sense that he lost everyone else in his family while the Abbotts just lost their father. And how...
brother.
Oh, yeah, there was a brother too. But Emmett uses the death of his family kind of as an excuse to give up, trying to have a life beyond survival. But the Abbotts kind of use Lee's death as kind of encouragement to keep going, because they have to make his sacrifice worth something, so they're using what they have to help the world around them. It's really cool to also see both of the kids play more significant roles in this film, especially near the end. Reagan goes off on this whole mission to send the noise from the hearing aid out over the radio. And then by the end of the movie, both Reagan and her brother, Marcus, we both see them. Well, Marcus has that whole moment with the radio where he kills the monster. And then we also see Reagan kill a monster while the radio is playing. And it's just really cool just to see these young characters stepping up and kind of like intentionally taking action. It reminds me of a lot of what Paul wrote in 1 Timothy when he says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." And yeah, just the fact that even though they're young, they're doing so much. Some of that's because they were forced to because of the apocalyptic world they are now, but it's also just them learning to grow and become who they're meant to be.
And taking on the responsibility that not a lot of kids get. Again, this is a futuristic, apocalyptic type of world that probably will never happen. It's admirable that they are accepting responsibility so young. So we definitely have not seen the last of The Quiet Place. There is a spin-off in the works called A Quiet Place Day 1, which is set to release right now, about a year from now, March 8th, 2024. I'm sure that'll be pushed back maybe a couple weeks. They kind of do that sometimes, but I'm excited for that. They also have a third installment of the trilogy coming out probably 2025. Again, I'm not a huge fan of cinematic universes, but if they can continue the story as it is an original story, I'm very excited. Like, if they can continue to make it a gripping, intense PG-13 type of horror movie, I'm all for it.
I'm super excited to see where this franchise go. I think A Quiet Place Day 1 is expected to follow a different group of people, so that's going to be interesting to see just everything happening from a different perspective, and then seeing the story of the Abbott family continue in the third one. And I think they're also working on a video game.
I did see that, yeah. I think that'd be sick.
I think it's VR too, so that's gonna...
Dude, that'd be
that's
so
gonna be
cool.
exciting.
Yeah.
So just experiencing this world for yourself is definitely going to be, terrifying, but really cool at the same time. So this is a franchise that's definitely going to make a mark in cinema.
For sure. I'm excited to see those come out in the near future. I'm glad we were able to talk about this, Zach, and I really like the points you brought up on it. For those of you who haven't seen it and want a little bit of a thriller in your life, definitely go watch it. It gets you excited. It's definitely one of those, like we talked about in the Puss in Boots episode, that's just gets you excited for what a good movie is like, So go watch it if you haven't. It's really good. It gets you a little nervous when you sleep at night. And if that's not for you, then I'd suggest you go listen to our horror movie episode with Deacon, where he has some good points on why we shouldn't be scared at horror movies. It's all connected, guys. We got some great episodes if you want to go back and listen to ones that you haven't listened to. They're all there for you to enjoy, both on Spotify and YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. But those are the main places you should listen. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, give us a rating of 5 stars, thumbs up, whatever the platform has. Follow our Instagram for updates and memes about the movies that we cover, and also follow our Discord, where we have great commentary and discussion with the community, and you get to learn what each week's episode is before it even comes out. That's a little Discord exclusive for you. Zach, thanks for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's been great to talk about some of my favorite movies. So
Yeah. With that said, have a great day. We love you guys. Peace out.
peace out.